Welcome to this build of a 48-inch wingspan Tomboy Senior. Now this is a lovely vintage model that was designed by David Boddington, and David Boddington adapted a 1950s design called the Tomboy by Vic Smeeds. But it's still got those great lines that make it a vintage model, and it's a really nice build. And so far we've completed the wings, and we've got the fuselage to a fairly advanced stage where there's just a few little jobs left to do. Now, one of the jobs before the fuselage is finished is there's supposed to be a little bit of sheeting down here, top and bottom. Now, some of that is for a keel, some of that is probably mounting for the fin and the tail plane and the rudder. Now, I don't think it's needed for strength. This is really strong. It's great construction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that sheeting until I actually do the tail plane and the fin, and see how it's needed and whether we can thin the balsa down from what's suggested or not do quite as much, because I want to try and reduce the weight in the tail as much as possible. So we're going to leave that for a later date. Now, the other three jobs we've got to do is we've got to finish around the front of the cockpit here, just sheet that in a little bit. We've got to put the cheeks on the nose, either side of the engine bearers, and we've got to finish them or do the mounting for the wing. We've not only got to put the dowels in the back for the elastic bands, but we've got to construct around the front here so that it holds the wing nice and secure. You've got dowels for the mounting, and also it holds the wing at the right angle. It's not going to move. Now, the first job we're going to do is we're going to do this front of the cockpit here, and we're going to sheet that in. So let's take a closer look at that first, and then we'll move on to getting the wings mounted properly. Right, so this is the area here that we need to have a little bit of a dashboard and sheet in these sides. And there's a former here that goes here, F2, which is shown on the plans, which is more or less right. It's a good starting point anyway, and I've cut out exactly that. And when we put this into place, it's, as I say, it's more or less right. And if we glue that into place, we can then sheet the sides of this with some 1/16 or 1.6mm balsa, something really light that will just bend round there. But at the moment, we can see that this former F2 comes right to the edge of the fuselage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim these sides just a little bit by 1/16, so that the sheeting will come round and come right and sit on top of that edge there. And so I'm going to trim those sides. I'm then going to glue this into place, and I'll just sand that a little bit so there's a little bit of a flat on there, so we can then do that sheeting. I think if I was doing this again, what I would do, because the sheeting that I'm going to put on is going to sit behind this firewall, so it will be, the top of the sheet will be the same level as the top of the firewall. I think if I was going to do this again, I would have taken 1/16 off the whole of the top of this former, and I would actually gone on top of it. But I don't really think we've got an option now, because it'll bring it up a little bit too high, and I don't really want the effort of having to cut off 1.6mm or 1/16 of an inch off the top of this former. So we'll put it behind, and I'm sure that will look fine as long as we're gentle in how we sand it in. So I'm going to get on and do that now, and we'll come back and we'll have a look and see how that looks. Right, well, I've now got this front section of the cockpit finished, or at least finished bar a little bit of sanding and detailing. And so I've got F2 in, this curved former here, and a little bit of sheeting in the back here just to neaten it up, close off the space, 1/16 sheeting that is, and then I've got this 1/16 1.6mm combing that comes over the top here, and that all nicely blended in. As I say, it'll need a little bit of a sanding just to make sure that it looks good when it's covered. But now we can move on to getting the wing attachments done, and particularly this front section around here. Well, the first thing I've done is to put in this carbon fibre tubing in the back here, so a couple of holes either side in that gusset, and just slid that through. Now when I'm making holes like this, I find if I was going to drill that, it often tears up the balsa, and what I like to use is these diamond needle files, and I just use them with my hand. I just turn them like this and effectively drill a hole and sand it with these diamond files. They're really cheap, and I find they work really nice for putting lovely smooth holes into balsa without doing damage. Now we need to decide on the location for the rear of the wing, and that will be essentially just where the elastic band comes over like that, and we can put on the wing and just, oops, wrong way round, let's turn that round, put on the wing, and we can look and decide where that trailing edge goes in relation, if I turn that around, in relation to those that dowel, and we can see that just attaches there nicely, just not too much pressure, but enough. And so I've marked on a couple of lines, and I've used my set square just to make sure that that is equal on both sides, and that gives us the location for that trailing edge. So from there on we need to work now on this top of the canopy, and if we put the wing back on, so we need to decide, well, before we put the wing back on the plans it says about laminating 2 pieces of 1/8 balsa, and essentially that fits in the front there and gives us a curved front. And so the 1/8 balsa 2 pieces, which I've cut here, will go in between there, and obviously that will make up a quarter and fill the gap between these two longer runs, or yeah, these top pieces. Now the balsa that I've cut that so they're opposing grains. We've got grain going that way on that one and that way, and by laminating those, that will make that really, really strong. So I'm going to laminate that first, and I'm going to use some thick or medium CA just on there, and that'll give me time to laminate that properly. I'm going to then fit that between the spars or the struts, and then we need to determine the arc that comes on this. And before we can do that, we need to work out the furthest point forward, and you can see I've put a couple of lines on there which will be that furthest point forward where the front of that arc is. Now, determine what is that furthest point forward, we need to put on the wings again in the appropriate place, and then we need to use a piece of balsa, and we need to line up from the very front of the firewall, the top front of the firewall, to the wing, and that will determine the front of that arc. So what I've done is I've put a couple of lines on here where that point is, and you can see that there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create or laminate these together. I'm going to get that so it fits nicely between those spars, those pieces of quarter inch square, and then I'm going to put the arc on as on the plan that the front point is there, and then I can trim these side pieces to follow that arc around. Once we've done that, we need to think about an extra piece of balsa that then goes under here with a curve on it that will just sit nicely for the leading edge of the wings. Right, well, I've now got this piece of balsa laminated and it fits really nicely into there. We can see that we have the line across here, which is the furthest most point of the arc shown on here. And what I've done is I've just found a lid off a pin container, T-pin container, which is the right diameter for that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to place that on there, equally either side, and I'm just going to draw on the arc that is going to be the cut line for the front of this this fuselage cockpit. So there we go, we've got that on there now, and that is our cut line to cut along here and to sand. And then we need to think about the wings. Where do they go? Let me just get the trailing edge right. There. We need to think about making the piece underneath here just to support that front leading edge. Right, I thought I'd do a very quick update on this top of the canopy sort of cockpit here, where I'm shaping that to fit the front of the wing. Now the wing keeps coming on and off to make sure I've got the right fit there. So what I've done is I've put a couple of pins here in the back of the fuselage, right where the trailing edge of the wing goes, so I know I can get wing placement quickly and accurately each time. Now I've shaped this piece of balsa that's going to go on there, which takes the profile of the front of that leading edge. So what I'm ready to do now is I'm ready to actually glue that on. It's almost right. It's not quite there, a little bit more, but I'm just going to do the final finishing on the actual, when it's actually glued into place. In the shaping of this, I've been using one of my curved sanding sticks, which I make myself. If you're interested in how I make these, have a look in the description below this video, and you can see a link to a video there. And I've just been very carefully just taking off a little bit at a time to get this right. It's a little bit fiddly and you have to be careful you don't take off too much, but I'm almost there now, and as I said, I'm going to glue this on now and then do the final fitting. Right, well, I've now got this front section glued on and profiled, and you can see there's a kind of a slope down now from that leading edge down to the firewall, and you can see lovely smooth shape there, and I'm really pleased how that's gone. It's quite a fiddly thing to do. It wasn't a quick process, but it's nice when it fits just right. If you look on the plans, there's a template for a windscreen which I copied and cut out, and that seems to fit really well. It might need a little bit of trimming on the sides so it doesn't go too far down the fuselage, but that seems to fit pretty well. I'm going to have to sort out some acetate, something that not too thick but thick enough to do the job, so I'll have a look around for that. But just to say, that template is a really good fit. Now the next job is to put some dowels that are going to come out like this. They actually, I need to make a hole in the back. Let me just move the wing. I need to make a hole in the back of this former here, and then two dowels can slot through that hole and can be epoxied in place. I'm not going to use the carbon fibre like I used on the back here. I used the carbon fibre because I wanted the really lightweight. Here I don't mind so much because it's forward of the CG, and it sounds like I may be adding weight to the front here anyway, so a little bit of extra weight in the dowel, which is, to be honest, very little extra, is going to make not a lot of difference. So, and the reason I want to use dowel, which is an important thing, hardwood dowel, this is 6mm, is because it will glue in better and glue to the underside of that canopy there like that. Whereas I'm not sure the carbon fibre wheel. So what I'm going to do now is those dowels need to be at a right angle to each other. So I'm just going to line them up like this. I'll fit the wing as well and have a think about the best placement for elastic bands, where it needs to be. About like that, for the elastic bands to come over crosswise to the dowel on the back. So I'll get finished doing that now, and then we can move on to these cheeks. Right, I've now got the wing nice and secure attached to the fuselage, and you can see the elastic bands crossing over the top there, and you can see the dowels just sticking out the front there, on which the elastic bands are looped onto. And if I lift that up, hopefully you can see those dowels going back under the canopy here and into that crossformer, which is the 1.5mm ply crossformer, and there is a hole in that. They just stick into it a little way, and the dowels are epoxied into place. So that's really good. I'm really pleased to get that done. Now we're going to move on to doing these side cheeks on the nose, and before I tell you what I'm going to do, I just need to mention a couple of discrepancy on the plans. Right, well, these side cheeks are shown on not only the side elevation on the plans, but also on this plan view. And on the side elevation, they're saying 3/8 balsa and 1.5mm plywood. Whereas on the plan view, they're saying 3/8 balsa and a 0.8mm ply. So they're saying thinner plywood on this plan elevation, on this plan view. Now, if you look at the build article that came with these plans, written at the same time and is available on AutoZone to download along with the plans, then they're saying 1.5mm ply and 3/8 balsa. But if we have a look at the front of the fuselage and of what I'm going to do, and I'll tell you my thoughts on it, but I thought it would be useful just to point this out on the plans, this discrepancy. Right, well, I've started cutting out these pieces for the cheeks, and what I've done is I've cut 3/8 balsa and I've cut 0.8mm ply. Now, the reason I've done that is because I think that fits a lot better, and if we put that against the side of the fuselage where it's going to go, then that is a perfect fit. Just wants a very slight sanding to make it just fit in properly. If I put on 1.5mm plywood on the inside, I'm actually going to have to sand off quite a lot more there to make that fit. Does it really matter? No. Sanding those extra off, if you use 1.5mm, is not, you know, it'll take what, just a few seconds. Strength wise, does it matter? Not really. I think this combination of 3/8 balsa and 0.8mm ply is going to be really strong. It's going to epoxy onto the firewall, it's going to epoxy onto the engine bearers, and I think that will be a really good, strong combination. So I suppose the only downside is that if you use a thicker ply, you're increasing weight. But if you read the build article, David Boddington had to add lead to the nose, so it might be that that extra weight doesn't really make a lot of difference. So I think just go with whatever you've got. You're more likely to have maybe 1.5mm ply than this 0.8, but I would say it doesn't matter. So I've cut out these just very roughly, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to glue the ply onto the balsa, and then they're quite a bit oversized at the moment, and so I'm going to glue that on. I'm going to trim them down, sand them up to size, and then we can get them glued on. Once they're glued on, there's going to be quite a bit of profiling to bring them round to match the curve on the firewall and the combing. Well, I've got these cheeks, these nose cheeks on now, epoxied in place, and I've roughly profiled them, and it's really given the fuselage a great look now. I'm really pleased with how it's looking. I haven't totally finished profiling the front of these. I'm going to have a little bit of a think about how much I trim them down or narrow them down towards the tip. But there's going to be, right at the end before I do the covering, it's going to need a good sand and just finishing off that fine detail of the profiling. Now I said it's finished for now, this fuselage, and I say that because there's a few other things that need to be done. We've got a hatch here at the moment, or a hole here at the moment behind the firewall, where we're going to need some sheeting eventually. But I want to wait and see where the CG is first, because it might be that we need a little bit of an access hatch here to get some weight, some lead in there, or it might be to help with battery positioning. So I'm going to leave that and keep my options open with that for the moment. Similarly on the front here, where we've got the landing gear and the stitching, looks a little bit ugly at the moment, and I may box that in or just cover it with a piece of sheeting. But I don't want to do that if I end up being nose heavy. The last thing I want to do is add weight to the nose. So again, keeping my options open. Obviously it all needs really well fuel proofing because of the diesel, and we've got a little bit of sheeting that will probably go in here just to finish off that as a solid structure and then open structure. But what I want to do is get the servo tray fitted first, which is going to sit on there, and get the linkages in. And by having those holes there, it will allow me to look through and line up the push rods so I get them really nice and straight. So anyway, I'm going to draw this video to a close now, and in the next video we're going to be looking at constructing the tailplane, the fin, the rudder, this little keel here, so everything down this back end. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this useful, I hope you found it interesting, and please come back and see how we get on in the next video and the subsequent videos, getting this lovely Tomboy Senior finished and to the airfield.